The moment. Her knees buckled. Adrian Walker lunged across the marble floor and caught her before her skull cracked against the steel edge of the desk. 62 floors above a sleeping city, the most powerful woman in the building hung limp in the arms of the man who scrubbed its hallways for a living. "Don't you dare call an ambulance." That single whispered command would nearly cost them both everything. Before we go on, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. And if you still believe a man's character matters more than the title on his badge, do me a favor and subscribe before you go any further. The rain had been coming down for 3 hours by the time Adrian Walker rolled his cart onto the 62nd floor, and he almost didn't go up there at all. He'd already signed the log at the loading dock. His shift ended at midnight, and the clock on the wall behind the security desk read 11:41 when he passed it. Every other soul in Sterling Ridge Technologies had gone home hours ago. The parking garage was a concrete tomb. The elevators dinged into empty lobbies. A man his age, 4 years into a grief he still hadn't set down, had every reason to punch out early and drive home to a boy who was probably already asleep. But the executive floor still had a light on. And Adrian Walker had never in his life been able to walk past a light that should have been off. "Marcus," he said into his radio, thumbing the button. "You still down at the desk?" The radio crackled. "Where else would I be, brother? Watching the rain and losing money to my own fantasy team." "Top floor's still lit. You got anybody up there on the manifest?" A pause. Paper shuffling. Nobody. Building's empty top to bottom except you and me." "Copy that. Gonna go check it before I clock out." "Adrian." Marcus's voice dropped. "It's almost midnight, man. You got a kid at home. Let the light burn. It's not your salary." "Never has been." He clipped the radio back to his belt. "Won't take 5 minutes." He should have listened. He'd think about that later, about how the smallest choices are the ones that split a life clean in two. But right then, he just pushed his cart toward the elevator, because that was the kind of man he was, and a man doesn't get to choose which nights his nature costs him something. The doors opened on the 62nd floor, and he heard her before he saw her. Not words. Just breathing. The kind of breathing a person does when they're trying very hard to convince their own body they're fine. Shallow. Fast. A little ragged at the edges. "Hello." He left the cart by the elevator. "Facilities. Anybody up here?" "I'm working." The voice came from the corner office, and Adrian knew that voice the way every man in that building knew it. Everyone had heard Vanessa Sterling on the loudspeaker at the all-hands. Everyone had watched her cross the lobby at 7 in the morning, like the floor itself owed her an apology for being slow. 32 years old, and she ran a company her father had built from a garage into a tower, and she ran it like she was afraid to blink. "Ma'am, it's almost midnight." He stopped in the doorway. "I'm just doing my rounds. Didn't mean to bother you." She was at her desk with 3 monitors going, and a phone pressed between her ear and her shoulder, and she didn't look up. "Then don't." "Yes, ma'am." He turned to go. He genuinely turned to go. And that's when he heard the phone slide off her shoulder and clatter onto the desk, and he heard her say very quietly to no one at all, "I just need a minute." He looked back. Her face had gone the color of the paper on her desk. There was sweat on her upper lip, and her hand was flat against the wood, like the desk was the only thing keeping the whole room from tilting sideways. "Ma'am, when's the last time you ate?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked you." "I don't—" She pushed her chair back and stood, and the standing was a mistake, and both of them knew it half a second too late. "I have a meeting to prep for. I have a board that meets in 9 hours. I don't have time to—" Her knees went. Adrian moved before his brain caught up to what his eyes were seeing. 20 feet of open office, and a man of 36, who hadn't run for anything in years, and he crossed it before she'd fallen more than a foot. He got an arm under her shoulders and another behind her knees, and he caught her the way you catch something you already know you can't afford to drop. She wasn't heavy. That was the first thing he noticed, and it turned something over in his gut. She was one of the most powerful people in the state, and she weighed almost nothing like a woman who'd been running on coffee and willpower for so long. There was hardly anything left of the actual person underneath. Okay, Okay, I've got you. I've got you. Put me down. Her eyes were open, but they weren't tracking right. Put me down. Right now. I'm gonna set you in the chair, all right, not the floor. The chair, nice and slow. I said, I heard what you said. He eased her into the leather chair and crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye. And I'm gonna ignore it, same as you'd ignore me if the shoe was on the other foot. When did you eat? Her jaw worked. She was a woman who had built a life on never answering a question she didn't want to answer, and he watched her try, and he watched it not work. Yesterday, lunch. Yesterday, lunch. He nodded slowly like she'd confirmed a bad number on an invoice. It's almost midnight tonight. You've been standing on an empty tank for a day and a half and then you stood up too fast. That's not a heart attack. That's your body sending you a bill and it just came due. I'm calling you an ambulance. That got her. Whatever fog had been over her eyes burned right off. Her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. No. Ma'am. No ambulance. Her fingers were cold. You call an ambulance, it's in a report. It's in a report. It's a leak by 6 a.m. It's a leak by 6 a.m. I walk into that board meeting as a woman who collapsed at her desk, and Grant Holloway has everything he needs to take this company away from me. She was gripping his wrist so hard it hurt. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I don't get to be tired. I don't get to be sick. Men like the one coming for me tomorrow have been waiting 3 years for a photograph of me looking weak. You will not hand him one. Adrian didn't say anything for a moment. He was a lot of things, but stupid wasn't one of them, and he understood exactly what she was describing, because he'd lived a version of it himself in a much smaller room. He knew what it was to be one bad day away from losing something you'd bled for. All right, he said finally. No ambulance. Her grip loosened a fraction. But you're not going back to that desk. Here's what's happening instead. He stood. You've got a kitchenette off the conference room. I've stocked it 100 times. There's crackers, there's peanut butter, there's electrolyte packets in the third drawer for the guys who work the mechanical floors. You're gonna eat, you're gonna drink, and then you're gonna lie down for a few hours. And if you're still white as a sheet after that, then we're having the ambulance conversation again, and you're losing it. Deal. She stared at him like he'd started speaking a language she'd never heard. Nobody talks to me like that. Yeah, well. He was already heading for the kitchenette. Maybe that's the whole problem, ma'am. He heard her behind him make a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was the sound of a person who'd forgotten laughing was still available to them. He came back with peanut butter, smeared on crackers, and a glass with a fizzing electrolyte tablet, dissolving in it. And he set them on the desk in front of her, like he was serving a customer at a diner. No ceremony, no pity. Eat. I have to. Eat. And then you can go back to saving the world. It'll wait 10 minutes. The world's very patient about waiting for people to eat in my experience. He pulled a chair around and sat where she could see him, arms folded. Go on. She ate. She hated that she ate. He could see it all over her face, but her body took over where her pride left off, and she went through those crackers like a woman who hadn't admitted to herself how hungry she was. The color started coming back into her cheeks by the third one. What's your name? Adrian. Adrian. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and there was something almost human in the gesture, almost young. Your facilities. Supervisor, nights. How long? 4 years about. And in 4 years, how many times have you caught your CEO before she cracked her head on a desk? You're the first. He allowed himself a small smile. But the night's not over. She drank the electrolytes and made a face like it tasted like the ocean, which it did. Then she set the glass down and folded her hands in her lap, and for a second, the mask came all the way off, and Adrian saw exactly what he'd suspected he'd see. He saw a person who was terrified. He saw a person who'd been terrified for a long time and had gotten so good at hiding it that hiding it had become its own kind of exhaustion. You should go home, she said. Your shift's over. I checked the clock. It is. Then go. I will. He didn't move. Right after I know you're lying down and not gonna do this again the second I'm in the elevator. I've got a kid at home. He's 9. You know what I tell him when he says he's fine and I know he's not? What? I tell him fine is not a feeling, it's a wall. And walls are for people who've decided they'd rather fall down alone than let anybody see them wobble. Adrian shrugged. I've watched you wobble now. Cat's out of the bag. Might as well let me make sure you land soft. Vanessa Sterling looked at this man. This facility's supervisor in a gray uniform shirt with his name stitched over the pocket. This stranger who'd caught her fed her and now stood in her office quoting the things he told his little boy. And something in her face broke very quietly. The way ice breaks without a sound, just a change you feel more than hear. There's a bedroom, she said. Off the suite. My father had it put in. He used to sleep here when the company was young. She swallowed. I've never used it. I always thought if I slept here it meant I couldn't handle it. It meant I was one of those people who... She stopped. One of those people who, what? Who needs things. She said it like a confession. My father used to say the day you need something is the day somebody owns you. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Your father, he said carefully, sounds like a man who died alone. He watched the words land. He watched her flinch. And he watched half a heartbeat later, the flinch turn into something else, not anger, which is what he'd braced for, but a terrible naked kind of recognition, like he'd said out loud, the exact thing she'd spent years refusing to think. He did, she whispered. He did die alone. I was at a conference in Singapore. I got the call in the back of a car. I'm sorry. He'd have wanted me at the conference. She said it fast automatic, a line she'd clearly told herself 1,000 times. The deal mattered. He'd have wanted, ma'am. Adrian crouched down again slow, so it wasn't a looming thing. I lost my wife 4 years ago, cancer, and I have spent every one of those 4 years telling myself the things she'd have wanted, and you know what I've figured out. Vanessa didn't answer, but she was listening. She was listening the way a person listens when they've been starving for someone to say the true thing. Half of what I tell myself she'd have wanted, Adrian said, is just me wanting to feel better about the parts I got wrong. The dead don't want anything anymore. That's the whole tragedy of it. Wanting is a thing the living do. And you and me, we're the living. Even when we don't act like it. For a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Rain ran down the black glass. 62 floors below the city glittered on indifferent. Show me the bedroom, she said finally. I'll lie down. An hour. Then I'm back at the desk, and this conversation never happened, and you go home to your son. An hour. An hour. She stood, and she made it about 3 steps before the room went out from under her again. This time, there was no warning. 1 second she was walking, and the next her legs simply stopped believing in her, and Adrian was already moving, already there, catching her the second time in one night, and this time she didn't fight him. This time her head fell against his shoulder, and she said in a voice so small it barely qualified as a voice, I can't do it anymore. I'm so tired, Adrian. I'm so tired I can't see straight. I know. He got his arm under her knees and lifted her, and she was still light, and it still turned his stomach. I know. It's okay. You don't have to do it anymore tonight. That's the deal. Tonight you just have to be tired. That's all. Anybody can do that. Even you. The board is in 9 hours. And a person who's slept 2 of them will run circles around a person who slept none. You know that. You're the smartest person in this building. Do the math. She almost laughed again, that same broken half sound. You're very hard to argue with. My wife said the same thing, right up until she stopped arguing and just married me. He carried her through the suite. Which door? The one on the left. It's dark. He never wanted anyone to know it was there. Adrian shouldered the door open. There was a bed, a lamp, a small window. He set her down on top of the covers, as gently as a man sets down something he's afraid of breaking, and he pulled the blanket that was folded at the foot up over her shoulders. There's water on the nightstand. No, there isn't. Hang on. He went and filled the glass from the kitchenette and brought it back and set it where she could reach it. Now there is. You wake up thirsty. It's right there. You need anything, my radio's on channel 2. You just holler at Marcus and he'll ring me. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. But it wasn't quite a statement either. It sat in the space between them, small and afraid, And Adrian Walker, who had been reading that exact tone in a 9-year-old's voice for 4 years, heard everything underneath it. "My shift's over," he said gently. "I've got a boy at home." "Of course, yes, go." She turned her face toward the wall. "Thank you. For all of it. You didn't have to. Most people wouldn't have." "Get some sleep, Ms. Sterling." He clicked off the lamp. He crossed to the door. He had his hand on the frame, 1 foot already in the hall, already thinking about the drive home, already thinking about whether Lucas had remembered to leave the porch light on. And behind him in the dark, Vanessa Sterling reached out in her sleep and caught his hand. She wasn't fully under. She was in that gray country between awake and gone where the walls a person spends all day. Buildings simply aren't there anymore. And her fingers found his in the dark and closed around them and held on. Not gently, not politely. She held on the way you hold on to a railing over a long drop. She held on like a child. She held on like someone who had gone so long pretending she needed nobody that her own hand had finally called the bluff. Adrian stood very still. He could have pulled his hand back. She was mostly asleep. She'd never have known. He could have eased his fingers free and gone home. And this would have been a strange story. He never told anyone the night he caught the CEO twice and put her to bed and drove home in the rain. But he didn't pull his hand back, because he knew that grip. He'd felt that exact grip before, on a night 4 years gone in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and endings, when a woman he loved more than his own life had reached out from a bed she was never going to leave and held his hand exactly this way. Too hard, too scared, unable to say the thing out loud, saying it all through her fingers instead. "Don't go. Don't leave me alone in the dark. I've been so brave for so long, and I can't be brave anymore, and I need you to just be here." He'd promised himself that night that he would never again walk away from a person holding his hand like that. Not for any reason. Not for anything. So he did the only thing a man like Adrian Walker could do. He pulled the chair over from the corner quiet as he could, and he sat down beside the bed, and he let her keep his hand. "Marcus." He breathed into the radio so low it was barely sound. "You copy. Go ahead. I'm gonna be a while up here. Everything's fine. Don't send anybody up." A pause. "You okay, brother?" "I'm okay. Do me a favor. My neighbor Rosa's got my boy tonight. Numbers taped inside my locker door. Text her, tell her I'm running late, tell her I said thank you, tell her I'll be there before Lucas is up for school." "You want to tell me what's going on?" Adrian looked at the woman sleeping with her hand locked around his. "A person needed somebody not to leave," he said. "That's all. That's the whole thing." He clicked the radio off. And then it was just the two of them, and the rain, and the long hours. She slept hard once she went all the way under. He watched her face lose 10 years in the first 20 minutes, watched the lines around her mouth ease, watched the crease between her brows, finally let go of whatever it had been clenching around all day. Awake, she was a fortress. Asleep, she was just a tired young woman who'd lost her father and inherited his whole world, and hadn't been allowed to grieve either one. Adrian's own eyes grew heavy somewhere around 2 in the morning. He fought it for a while. He thought about Lucas, about the science project due Thursday, that they still hadn't finished the model of the solar system, with the styrofoam balls that were supposed to be planets, and mostly just looked like styrofoam balls. He thought about Rosa next door, 70 years old, who watched his boy 4 nights a week, and refused to take a dime for it, who'd told him once, "You lost your wife. Adrian, you don't have to lose your dignity too. Let a neighbor be a neighbor." He thought about the medical bills still stacked in the drawer of his kitchen table, the ones he paid down $40 at a time, the ones that would outlive him at the rate he was going. He thought about the man he used to be, before, the one with the engineering license and the good salary and the future that ran in a straight bright line. Building safety. Emergency systems. He'd been good at it, better than good. He'd designed evacuation protocols and fire suppression layouts and backup power schemes for buildings twice the size of this one. He'd walked into rooms full of people who'd bet their lives on his math being right, and his math had always been right. And then a doctor had said the word malignant, and the straight bright line had bent into a shape he couldn't follow. and by the time the dust settled, he was a widower with a little boy and a mountain of debt, and no room left in his chest for anything as delicate as a career. He'd needed a job that started immediately, and paid on Fridays, and didn't ask him to feel anything. So he'd taken a mop. And the license had lapsed. And the man he used to be had gone quiet, folded up and put away in a drawer somewhere behind the ribs, and Adrian had told himself he didn't miss him. How was still telling himself that, when his eyes finally closed. He woke to gray light and the sound of the city coming back to life, 62 floors down, and to the strange forgotten weight of a hand in his. For one disoriented second, he didn't know where he was. Then it came back: the office, the collapse, the long night, and he turned his head, and Vanessa Sterling was awake and watching him. She'd been watching him for a while, he could tell. She had the still, careful look of a person who'd surfaced from sleep slowly and lain there taking stock before letting on that they were awake. And she was still holding his hand. She hadn't let go, and now that she was awake and could see that she hadn't let go, she wasn't letting go either, and something passed between them in that gray light that neither of them had words ready for. "You stayed," she said. "You didn't let me leave." He nodded down at their hands. "That was a pretty serious grip you had going. I figured pulling loose might wake you, and you needed the sleep more than I needed my circulation." She looked at their hands. She seemed to be seeing them for the first time. Very slowly she uncurled her fingers. "I don't—" She sat up, and she was steadier now. The color all the way back in her face, but there was a new kind of tremor in her voice, the tremor of a person walking out onto ice they're not sure will hold. "I don't do that. I don't grab people. I have never in my adult life reached out and held onto a stranger like a frightened—" She stopped, pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. "God, what must you think of me?" "You want to know what I think of you?" "No." A beat. "Yes. I think you've been drowning very quietly in a room full of people who all assumed you could swim." Adrian sat forward, elbows on his knees. "And I think last night your arms finally got tired. That's not weakness, Ms. Sterling. That's just physics. Everybody's arms get tired, even the strongest swimmer in the pool. The only difference between you and the rest of us is nobody ever told you you were allowed to grab the wall." She stared at him. "How is it," she said slowly, "that a man who mops floors for a living keeps saying the truest things anyone said to me in 10 years? "I didn't always mop floors." "No. No." But he didn't offer it up, not yet, and she didn't push, and there was a strange, easy quiet in the not pushing, like two people who'd known each other a long time instead of 8 hours. She reached for the water glass on the nightstand and drank the whole thing. Then she looked at the little window at the gray dawn, and he watched the fortress start rebuilding itself brick by brick behind her eyes. He watched her remember who she was supposed to be. He watched her remember the board. "What time is it?" "Little after 6. "The meeting's at 9. She threw the blanket off. "There's a change of clothes in the I keep a—" She was moving fast now, the exhaustion buried again under a fresh coat of urgency. "You should go, Adrian. Please, genuinely, your son. And it's better if no one—" She caught herself, looked at him. And to her credit, she didn't dress it up. "It's better for you if no one knows you were up here. If anyone saw. A man carrying me. Into a bedroom. In a building with 100 cameras. You understand what a person like Grant Holloway could do with that." The cold came into Adrian's chest slowly. "There are cameras up here. There are cameras everywhere." She was pulling a blazer from a closet he hadn't noticed. "It's a data company, Adrian. We watch everything. It's the whole—" She went very still. "The hallway. The suite entrance. There's a camera on the suite entrance." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "It's fine," she said, and it was the least convincing thing she'd said all night. "The footage rolls over, and even if it didn't, we did nothing wrong. You did nothing wrong. You caught a woman who fainted, and you made sure she didn't crack her head open, and you sat in a chair like a gentleman all night. There's no story there." "Ma'am," Adrian said quietly, "in my experience, whether there's a story doesn't have much to do with whether there's a story. It has to do with who wants there to be one." She looked at him, and he watched her understand that he was right, and he watched her hate that he was right, And he watched underneath both of those things, the smallest flicker of fear, not for herself this time. For him. "Then let's make sure," she said, "that nobody has the chance." But it was already too late for that. Because 40 floors down in a small room off the security office that not even Marcus had access to, a screen glowed in the dark. And on that screen, frozen and time-stamped, and already copied to a private drive, was a grainy gray image of a man in a facilities uniform, carrying the unconscious CEO of Sterling Ridge Technologies through a door and into a bedroom at 12:53 in the morning. The man watching that screen had been waiting 3 years for a photograph of Vanessa Sterling looking weak. He'd just been handed something better. He picked up his phone and he smiled, and he began very carefully to type. The message came at 6:47 in the morning, and Vanessa Sterling read it standing up in her office, with her hair still damp from the sink, and the blood drained out of her face so fast that Adrian, halfway to the elevator, turned around before she'd made a sound. "Ms. Sterling." She didn't answer. She was staring at the phone in her hand like it had turned into something that could bite her. "Ms. Sterling, what is it?" She turned the screen toward him. It was the photograph. The grainy gray still of him carrying her through the bedroom door, time-stamped 12:53 a.m. And underneath it, a block of text that Adrian read once, then read again, because his brain refused to accept it the first time. "Interesting night, Vanessa. I'm sure the board would love to hear how you and the janitor spend your evenings. Support the restructuring at 9 o'clock. Full endorsement, no objections. Or this goes to every director, every investor, and every reporter I know by noon. Your call. You have 2 hours." There was no signature. There didn't need to be one. "Grant," Adrian said. "He'd never send it himself. He's too careful." Her voice had gone flat and strange, the voice of a person doing math very fast underwater. "But it's him. It's his fingerprints all over it, even if it's not his phone. The restructuring vote is at 9. He needs my endorsement because he doesn't have the numbers without it. He's been 3 votes short for a month." She set the phone down on the desk with a control so deliberate it was almost violent. "And now he thinks he has me. Does he?" She looked up at him. "Does he have you?" Adrian said again. "That's a real question. Because from where I'm standing, that photograph shows a man carrying a woman who fainted. That's all it shows. You start acting like it shows something else, you're the one who makes it into something else. But if you walk into that room and endorse a plan you don't believe in because of a picture of me doing my job, then yeah, then he's got you. Not because of the picture, because you handed yourself over." She was quiet for a moment. "You don't understand how this works." "Then explain it to me." "It doesn't matter what the picture shows, Adrian. It matters what it looks like. It matters what people are ready to believe. And people are always ready to believe the worst about a woman who got somewhere young." She started to pace fast, tight little turns in front of the black windows. The second that image is out, the story writes itself. She's compromised. She's reckless. She's sleeping with the help. Her judgment can't be trusted. And every single person who ever resented me for sitting in my father's chair gets to nod along and say they always knew. It won't matter that it's a lie. The lie is more useful than the truth, so the lie is what survives. And I lose my job. She stopped pacing. "Yes," she said quietly. "You lose your job. Best case, you lose your job. Worst case, he finds a way to make it look like something happened, and you lose a great deal more than that. He'll go after the weaker target. That's how men like Grant operate. He won't come at me first. He'll come at you because you can't afford lawyers and I can, and he knows it." Adrian absorbed that. He thought about Lucas. He thought about the medical bills in the kitchen drawer. He thought about how long it had taken him to find a job that paid on Fridays and didn't ask him to feel anything, and how a man his age with a lapsed license and a 4-year hole in his resume didn't get to be picky about the next one. And then he thought about the woman in front of him, pacing a hole in her own carpet at 7 in the morning, and he made a decision that surprised even him. "So fire me," she turned. "What?" "Fire me, right now, before 9. You walk into that board meeting and you tell them the truth that a facility supervisor caught you when you fainted and made sure you didn't hurt yourself, and that when you found out he'd stayed, you terminated him for being on the executive floor after hours without authorization. Clean. Boring. Nothing to sell to a reporter. And then Grant's got nothing because the thing he's threatening to expose already happened and got dealt with, and there's no scandal left to leak. He spread his hands. It costs me a job. Jobs I can find. It costs him his whole play. That's a trade I'll take before breakfast. She stared at him. You'd do that. I'd do that. You'd let me fire you in front of the board on the record wrongly to take a weapon out of his hand. Something was happening in her face that he couldn't quite read. You'd let me make you look like the man who did something wrong, so that I don't have to look like the woman who did. I'd let you do what needs doing to keep your father's company, Adrian said. I don't much care how it looks. I stopped caring how things looked about 4 years ago. Turns out it's very freeing. You should try it sometime. For a moment, she didn't say anything at all. And then she did something he did not expect. She laughed, a real one this time, short and startled and almost angry, and she pressed her fingers to her eyes, and when she took them away, they were wet. No, she said. No, I'm not going to fire you. She said it slowly, like she was surprising herself, like she was hearing the decision at the same moment he was. Do you understand that in 8 hours you've offered to resign twice and to let me fire you once? 3 times you've offered to throw yourself under the wheels so I don't get a scratch. And every single time, it's the same move: make yourself small, make yourself the one who takes the hit, because you decided a long time ago that you weren't worth protecting. She shook her head. I've spent my whole life around people who'd sell me out to save themselves. I have never once, not one time, met a person who'd let himself be destroyed to save me. And I'm not going to reward it by destroying you. That's not a trade I'll take. Not before breakfast, not ever. Adrian didn't have anything to say to that. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him and decided he was worth protecting. He'd forgotten what it did to a person's chest. Then what? He said finally, and his voice was rougher than he meant it to be. If we don't take his deal, and we don't take him off the board, what do? You've got 2 hours. We find out who sent that message. Vanessa was already moving, and the fortress was back up, but it was a different fortress now. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She was going on offense, and the change in her was like watching a light come on in a house you'd assumed was empty. That photograph didn't take itself. Someone pulled it off the security system, cropped it, time-stamped it, and got it to Grant. That's not Grant. Grant doesn't know how to work a coffee machine. Somebody in this building did that for him. And whoever did it left a trail, because everybody always leaves a trail, and I own every single system that trail runs through. You've got someone in security. I've got a whole department in security. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. And I have exactly one of them I'd trust to tell me the truth about the other 40. She picked up her phone and made a call, and while it rang, she looked at Adrian and said quieter. You should still go. This is going to get ugly, and you don't have to be standing in it when it does. You already decided you weren't going to let me be small, Adrian said. Bit late to start telling me to leave. Her mouth twitched. The call connected. Marcus, she said. It's Vanessa Sterling. No, nothing's wrong. I need you to come up to 62, and I need you to not tell anyone you're coming. Right now. And bring your access logs. She paused. Yes, that Vanessa Sterling. Yes, I know what time it is. She hung up. Marcus, Adrian said. Marcus Bell. You know him. He's the only reason I got through last night. Man's watched my kid grow up over the radio. If there's one person in that department who didn't touch that footage, it's Marcus. Good, Vanessa said. Because I'm about to bet a great deal on that being true. Marcus Bell came off the elevator. 11 minutes later, looking like a man who'd been called to the principal's office at retirement age. He was 58, built like a retired linebacker gone soft around the middle, and he stopped dead when he saw Adrian standing in the CEO's office. Adrian, brother, what? He looked between them. What's going on? I've been trying to raise you on the radio since your shift ended. I texted Rosa like you asked, but then you just went dark up here and It's okay, Marcus. I am okay. Adrian crossed to him. Ms. Sterling fainted last night. I caught her. I stayed to make sure she was all right. That's the whole thing. But somebody pulled the camera footage off the suite hallway, and they're using it to blackmail her, and we've got—" He glanced at the clock. An hour and 40 minutes to figure out who before it costs her the company. And costs me my job. Maybe worse. Marcus's face went through several things very fast. Confusion, alarm, and then settling over the top of all of it, a hard, cold anger that told Adrian everything he needed to know about which side of this the man was on. "Somebody pulled footage off 62, Marcus said slowly. "Off the executive suite line." "Yes," Vanessa said. "Ma'am, that line's restricted. That's not a camera the floor guys can even see. That feed goes to one recorder, and the recorder's in the vault room, and the vault room takes 2 credentials to open." His jaw worked. "There's maybe 5 people in this whole company with the access to touch that footage. And I'm one of them, and I didn't do it, and I'll swear that on anything you put in front of me." "I believe you," Vanessa said. "That's why you're the one standing here." "Who are the other 4? Adrian asked. Marcus was already unclipping the tablet from his belt. Head of Security's 1, 2 of his deputies, and— He stopped. His thumb hovered over the screen. "And the systems contractor, the outside guy, Reyes, came in about 6 weeks ago to do the—" He looked up. "To do the data center upgrade." The room went very still. "Say that again," Vanessa said. "The systems contractor. Grant's people brought him in. Said the data center needed a hardware refresh before quarter end, and the board signed off on it because Grant made it sound routine, and this guy Reyes has had vault access for 6 weeks, so he could—" Marcus's voice trailed off as the shape of it came clear to all 3 of them at once. "So he could work on the recorders, which sit in the same vault. Which means he's had a key to that footage since before your CEO ever fainted. He didn't just grab last night's clip," Adrian said slowly. "He's been in that room for 6 weeks with the keys to everything you record, and a man Grant put there." "Pull his access logs," Vanessa said. "All of them. Every door, every credential, every login going back to the day he started. I want to know where that man has been in my building at every hour of every day for 6 weeks. Can you do that from here?" "I can do that from anywhere." Marcus was already typing. "But ma'am, if I start pulling those logs, it flags. The system logs the person who logs the logs, if that makes sense. Head of Security'll get a notification inside of a couple minutes that somebody's auditing his contractor. And if the head of Security's in on it, then he'll know we're looking." Vanessa nodded. "Do it anyway." "Ma'am, do it, Marcus. We don't have the time to be quiet. In an hour and a half, I walk into a room, and either I'm holding proof, this whole thing is manufactured, or I'm holding nothing, and I lose everything my father built. Loud and armed eats, quiet and empty. Pull the logs." Marcus looked at Adrian. "She always like this?" he asked. "Only met her last night," Adrian said. "But near as I can tell, yeah." Marcus pulled the logs. It took 90 seconds for the data to load, and it took Vanessa about 30 to find the thing that made her go completely silent. She was reading over Marcus's shoulder, scrolling with one finger, and then she stopped scrolling and put her hand flat on the tablet. "There," she said. "Read that back to me. The vault access. 3 nights ago." Marcus read it. "Reyes badges into the vault room at 2:14 a.m. Badges out at 4:40. 2.5 hours, he frowned. Middle of the night. Nobody schedules recorder maintenance for 2 in the morning. And the night before that? He scrolled. Same. 2:20 to 4:15. And this, she tapped the screen. This isn't the recorder log. This is the environmental log, the data center's climate system. Look at the timestamps. Every night this week, right in the middle of Reyes's little visits, someone's been manually overriding the cooling thresholds in the main server hall. Bumping them up. 1 degree, 2 degrees. Then setting them back before morning so the day shift never sees it. She straightened slowly. He's not maintaining the recorders. Or he is, but that's cover. He's using the vault access to get at the environmental controls, and he's been testing something, for a week, in the middle of the night, when no one's watching. Adrian felt the cold come back into his chest, and this time, it had a different quality to it. This time, it was professional. This was the part of his brain he'd folded up and put away 4 years ago, and it came awake all at once, The way an old reflex comes back the second you need it. "Let me see that," he said. Vanessa handed him the tablet without a word. He read the environmental logs. He read them the way he used to read building schematics, fast and sure, his eye going straight to the numbers that mattered. And what he saw made his stomach drop. "This isn't a test," he said. "This is a rehearsal." "What do you mean?" "He's not just nudging the temperature to see what happens. Look at the pattern. He's bumping the cooling set points, watching how fast the room heats, then dialing it back before it trips an alarm. He's finding the exact edge. He's learning precisely how long he can hold the cooling off before the automatic fail-safes kick in and shut the servers down to protect them." Adrian looked up. "You'd only need to know that number if you were planning to hold the cooling off on purpose. Long enough to do damage. But not so long the system saves itself. Damage to what? To the servers, to whatever's on them." He turned the tablet around so she could see. "Ms. Sterling, what's in that data center physically? What lives on those machines?" She was already ahead of him. He watched her get there. He watched the whole thing assemble behind her eyes. "Everything," she whispered. "The financial records, the transaction histories, every internal communication, the audit trail for the last 3 years. She looked up at him, and her face had gone white again, but not the white of fainting. This time, the white of a person seeing the bottom of something very deep. If those servers overheat and fail, if they fail hard all at once catastrophically, we lose the records. We lose the audit trail. We lose the paper that proves where every dollar went for 3 years. And whose fingerprints, Adrian said quietly, are on where those dollars went." Vanessa sat down slowly in her chair. "Grant's," she said. "Grant's fingerprints. He's been on the finance committee for 3 years. If someone's been moving money, if there's fraud in those records, fraud that a real audit would find, then Grant needs those records gone before anyone gets to look at them." She pressed both hands over her mouth. The restructuring vote, the layoffs. It was never about the failed software rollout. That was the excuse. He needs control of the company so he can bury the numbers before the annual audit finds them. And he needs those servers to fail so that even if he loses control, the evidence goes down with the ship. When's the audit? 3 weeks. And when's this rehearsal been building toward? Adrian looked at the logs again. Because a man who spent a week finding the exact edge of the failsafe isn't planning to wait 3 weeks. He's ready. He's been ready for days. He's just waiting for the right night. A night when everyone's distracted. A night when all the attention in this building is pointed somewhere else. He looked up at her. "A night," he said, "like the night of a big emergency board meeting." The silence in the room was total. "He's going to do it today," Vanessa said, "during the meeting. While everyone's in the boardroom watching Grant show them a photograph of you and me, Reyes is going to be 40 floors down, cooking my data center to death. And if it works, it looks like your fault," Adrian said. "Failed software rollout. Now a catastrophic data center failure on the same day. The CEO can't keep the lights on. Her judgment's compromised. There's even a photo to prove it. The board has no choice but to hand the keys to the responsible adult in the room, and the responsible adult is the man who engineered the whole thing." He set the tablet down. "It's clean, I'll give him that. It's a clean piece of work. He gets your company, and he burns the evidence in the same afternoon, and everybody thanks him for stepping up in a crisis." Marcus had gone gray. "We gotta call somebody. Police, FBI, somebody." "With what?" Vanessa's voice was steady now, cold and clear. The panic burned off, and something harder left in its place. "A contractor who badged into a vault room he's authorized to be in. Some temperature logs that could be 100 innocent things, Marcus. By the time I convince a detective this is real, the meeting's over and the servers are slag. We don't have evidence yet. We have a theory. A good theory. But Grant will have 40 lawyers who can make a good theory sound like a hysterical woman inventing a conspiracy because she got caught with the janitor." She stood up. "No, we don't call anyone yet. First we get proof. Real proof. The kind you can put on a screen in front of 13 board members and watch their faces change." "How?" Adrian asked. "You said he's found the edge of the failsafe, the exact number. Where would that number live? Is it written down? Is it in a system somewhere? Adrian thought about it. If he's smart, it's in his head and nowhere else. But if he's been running the rehearsals off a script, and the precision of these logs says he has, then somewhere there's a set of instructions. A sequence. What to override in what order, how long to hold it. You don't do something this delicate from memory. Not if you're a contractor getting paid to do a job. You do it off a checklist. He looked at Marcus. Does the vault room have its own cameras? Marcus blinked. The vault. Yeah, inside camera. Points right at the recorder racks. And who watches that feed? Nobody really. It's just archived. It's a camera watching the camera room. It's the most boring feed in the building. Nobody's ever... Marcus stopped. Nobody's ever looked at it because why would you? Pull it, Adrian said. The last 3 nights, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. If our man's been sitting in that vault working off a checklist, that camera's been filming him doing it the whole time. He'd never think to disable it because he'd never imagine anyone had a reason to look at footage of an empty vault room. A grim smile touched the corner of his mouth. He's been so busy stealing your cameras, he forgot he was standing in front of one. For a second, nobody moved. And then, Vanessa Sterling looked at Adrian Walker with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life. Something between astonishment and a kind of fierce, delighted vindication. The look of a person who's been fighting alone in the dark for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone hand her a light. Pull it, Marcus, she said without taking her eyes off Adrian. Pull that feed right now. Marcus pulled it. It took 4 minutes to find. 4 minutes of fast-forwarded empty vault, and then a figure entering, and Marcus slowed it to real time. And there he was, a lean man in a contractor's polo. Mid-40s, sitting down in front of the recorder racks with a tablet propped against the equipment and a folded sheet of paper in his hand, working the environmental controls with the unhurried patience of a man who's done it several times before and has no reason to think anyone will ever see. That's him, Marcus breathed. That's Reyes. Zoom on the paper in his hand, Vanessa said. Can you get it clearer? I can try. It's a good camera. It's a security recorder. It's built to catch detail. The image sharpened. And they're held up in the contractor's own hand, filmed by the very kind of camera he'd spent 6 weeks learning to defeat, was a printed sheet. A checklist. Numbered steps. And at the top of the sheet in the corner, small but unmistakable. Once Marcus zoomed to, it was a logo, the letterhead of Holloway Capital Partners. He printed it on Grant's stationery, Adrian said, almost in disbelief. The idiot printed his sabotage instructions on Grant's own letterhead. Not an idiot, Vanessa corrected softly. A contractor. A man who does what he's told and keeps his paperwork, because that's how contractors survive. You keep the paper so that if it goes wrong, you can prove who ordered it. She straightened, and there was iron in her spine now all the way up. He kept that checklist to protect himself, and it's going to hang both of them. She looked at the clock. 8:12, 48 minutes. Marcus, I need 3 things and I need them fast. I need this vault footage saved to a drive that only you control, and I need a second copy sent somewhere off this building's network. Cloud personal email. I don't care, just make sure it exists in a place Grant can't reach in the next hour. Can you do that? Already doing it. Second, I need eyes on the data center. Right now. I need to know if Reyes is down there, and I need to know the second he touches those controls, because if he starts the shutdown before I can stop this in the boardroom, no amount of footage matters. The servers are still gone. She turned. Adrian, can you read those environmental systems? In real time, if you were standing in that data center, could you tell me what he's doing, and could you stop it? Adrian went very still, because this was the question. This was the drawer behind the ribs, the man he used to be, the license that had lapsed, and the future that had bent. This was 4 years of telling himself he didn't miss it, and here was a woman asking him point blank whether he was still that man, or whether he'd let that man die in a hospital room along with his wife. Yeah, he said. I can read them, and I can stop it if I get there in time, and if he hasn't rigged the failsafes to stay off. But Ms. Sterling, if I go down to that data center and Reyes is there, and Grant's already told security, I'm a threat because of that photograph. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. Then you'll be a facilities supervisor caught trespassing in a restricted data center, during a corporate emergency," Vanessa said quietly. "And Grant will have every excuse in the world to have you arrested, or worse, and I won't be there to stop it because I'll be in a boardroom 60 floors up." "Yeah," Adrian said. "That." She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not going to order you to do it," she said. "I've spent one night learning that ordering you to do things is pointless anyway, because you just do whatever your conscience tells you, regardless of what anyone says. So I'm not going to order you. I'm going to tell you the truth instead, and then you decide." She took a breath. "If you don't go down there, I probably lose the company. Hundreds of people lose their jobs, and a man who committed fraud gets away with it and gets rewarded for it. And if you do go down there, you might save all of it, or you might get yourself hurt, or arrested, or blamed for the very thing you're trying to stop, because that's exactly the kind of trap Grant would build. I can't promise you it'll go well. I can't promise you anything. I can only tell you that I've never in my life needed anyone the way I need you to walk into that room right now, and I hate that that's true, and I'm asking you anyway." The office was quiet. 62 floors below, the city had come all the way awake, and somewhere down in the guts of the building, a data center hummed along, unaware, holding 3 years of truth in its cold, dark racks. Adrian thought about Lucas. He thought about the science project with the styrofoam planets. He thought about Rosa next door, and the medical bills in the kitchen drawer, and the promise he'd made himself in a hospital room 4 years ago that he'd never again walk away from a person who reached out for him in the dark. She hadn't grabbed his hand this time, but she was reaching all the same. He could see it. She just didn't have the language for it anymore, if she ever had. So she'd dressed it up in strategy and stakes and the fate of a company. But underneath all of it was the same grip he'd felt in the dark at 2 in the morning. "Don't leave me alone in this. I've been so brave for so long and I can't be brave alone anymore." "My son gets up for school at 7, Adrian said. "Rosa'll have him fed and out the door by 7:40. He won't even know I didn't come home last night." He set the tablet down and rolled his shoulders, and something in the way he moved was different now. Looser and surer, a man stepping back into a shape he'd worn for years and thought he'd lost. "So I've got till this afternoon before anybody's looking for me. That's plenty of time to go save your company, Ms. Sterling." Something crossed her face. Relief and fear, and under both of them, something warmer and more frightening than either. "Vanessa," she said. "What?" "My name. Stop calling me Ms. Sterling. You carried me to bed and sat up all night holding my hand, and now you're about to walk into a fire for me. I think we're past Ms. Sterling." She almost smiled. "It's Vanessa. Vanessa." He tried it. It fit stranger and better than he expected. "All right. Here's how this works. Marcus, you get me down to that data center on a service elevator that doesn't log if there's such a thing. There's one. Freight car. Old system doesn't tie into the main. Good. You get me down there quiet. Vanessa, you go into that boardroom and you buy me time. However you do it, whatever it takes. You keep those 13 people in their chairs, and you keep Grant talking, because the longer that meeting runs, the longer I have to get to those controls before Reyes finishes the job. And whatever you do," he looked at her hard, "do not let Grant know we've found the vault footage. Not until you can put it on the screen. You show that card too early, he tells Reyes to pull the trigger right now and it's over. You understand? We only get one moment where the whole thing lands at once. You wait for it." "I wait for it," Vanessa said. "Marcus, that second copy of the vault footage, the off-site one, the second it saved you, text Vanessa a link. She walks into that boardroom, knowing the proof exists, and it's safe. That way, even if they take her phone, even if they take mine, even if this whole thing goes sideways, the truth's already out of the building, and there's nothing they can do to call it back. On it. And Marcus." Adrian gripped the older man's shoulder. "If anything happens to me down there, if I don't come back up, you take care of my boy till this gets sorted. You and Rosa, you hear me?" Marcus's eyes were wet. "Don't you talk like that. You hear me. I hear you, brother, but you're coming back up, so quit it." Adrian nodded once. Then he turned to Vanessa, and for a second, neither of them knew what to do with the moment. This strange gulf of 8 hours that felt like 8 years. This woman he'd caught twice in the dark, and this man she'd decided was worth protecting. "Go save your company," he said. Go save it for me, she answered. And then come back up those stairs, Adrian Walker, because I did not survive last night just to lose the only person in this building who tells me the truth. I went, and as the freight elevator swallowed him and dropped him down into the cold, humming dark toward the data center, where a man with a checklist was waiting to burn 3 years of truth to the ground. Vanessa Sterling straightened her blazer, wiped the last of the fear off her face, picked up her phone and walked toward the boardroom to fight for everything her father had built, armed with nothing but a theory, a grainy photograph, and a stranger she'd known for 8 hours, who was at that very moment descending into the belly of the building to save her life's work with his bare hands and a knowledge he thought he'd buried with his wife. The elevator doors closed on the boardroom floor. 13 directors were already seated, and at the head of the table, straightening his cufflinks, wearing the easy smile of a man who believes he has already won. Grant Holloway looked up as she entered. Vanessa, he said warmly, you look tired. Rough night. She smiled back at him, and it was the smile her father had taught her, the one that gave away nothing at all. You have no idea, she said, and took her seat. The freight elevator let Adrian out on the mechanical level with a groan of old cables, and the first thing that hit him was the cold. Data centers ran cold on purpose, 65 degrees 68 at the outside, because the machines that lived in them threw off heat like small suns and had to be kept from cooking themselves. Adrian knew that number the way he knew his own son's birthday. It was the first thing they'd taught him 20 years ago, back when he'd been a man with a license and a future. The cold that hit him now was wrong. Marcus, he breathed into the radio. You there? I'm here. I'm watching you on the freight camera. You're clear so far, ain't nobody in that corridor. Data centers, the double doors at the end, badge reader on the right. I already popped the lock from up here, you just push. Marcus, it's warm down here. A pause. Say again. The corridor. It should be cold. This whole level should be cold enough to see your breath because the data center's right there and it bleeds. And it's warm. Adrian was already moving down the corridor fast and quiet. He started. Reyes already started. The cooling's been off long enough that it's warming the whole floor. How long ago did that vault footage show him working? What time did his badge hit the data center this morning? Typing. Then Marcus's voice came back tight and low. Reyes badged into the data center at 8:04. Adrian, that was 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes. Adrian reached the double doors and put his hand flat against them, and they were warm, too warm, like a stove that's been off a while, but not long enough. 40 minutes with the cooling off. Marcus, what's the meeting status? Is Vanessa in the room? She walked in at 8:15. They're in there now. Grant's got the floor. Then he timed it perfect. He sent Reyes down the second she left this office. Adrian's mind was moving now the way it used to, cold and fast and clean. He didn't wait for the meeting to end. He didn't even wait for it to get going good. He wanted a head start. He wanted these servers dying before anybody upstairs even smelled smoke. He pushed the door. The heat rolled out at him like something alive. He'd walked into hot server rooms before, back in the old life rooms where the cooling had failed and the machines were screaming toward the red. But he'd never walked into one that felt like this. This was worse. Because the cool here hadn't failed. It had been murdered deliberately by a man who knew exactly how far to push it. The air was thick and metallic, and it climbed the back of his throat, and the racks, rows and rows of them stretching off into the dim, thousands of green and amber lights winking in the gloom, were humming at a pitch that was slightly terribly wrong. Too high. Straining. The sound of machines working past the edge of what they were built to bear. And 40 feet down the center aisle, crouched at an environmental control panel, with a folded sheet of paper in one hand, was Reyes. He heard the door. He turned. For a second the two men just looked at each other across the hot, dim length of the server hall. The contractor with his checklist and the facilities supervisor, who wasn't supposed to be there. And Adrian watched the man's face do the math. Watched him recognize the gray uniform, watched him land on exactly the wrong conclusion. Your facilities. Reyes straightened slowly. You're not supposed to be down here. This is a restricted... Cooling's off in here. Adrian took a step in, keeping his voice easy. keeping his hands loose and visible. You know that whole room's overheating. You want to get that back on before we lose the whole floor. I'm handling it. It's a scheduled maintenance override. Authorized. Reyes shifted his weight and his hand drifted just slightly toward his pocket. You need to leave, now, before I call this in. Scheduled maintenance. Adrian nodded slowly, taking another step, closing the distance, one easy foot at a time. At 8 in the morning, with the cooling completely off and the room 10 degrees hot and climbing. That's some maintenance. Another step. What's on the paper, Reyes? The contractor's face changed. How do you know my name? And there it was. The tell. The half-second of fear that told Adrian everything, that this man knew exactly what he was doing, knew it was wrong, and had just realized that somebody else knew it too. Because we pulled the vault footage, Adrian said quietly. The camera inside the recorder room. The one you forgot about because you were so busy stealing everybody else's cameras. We watched you sit in that vault 3 nights running, working off that exact checklist in your hand, learning the fail-safes. And we saw the letterhead Reyes. We saw whose stationery it's printed on. So I'm gonna ask you one more time, real friendly, and then we're done being friendly. Turn the cooling back on. For a long moment, Reyes didn't move. Adrian could see him calculating, could see a lifetime of contractor's instinct running the numbers. And then slowly, the man's shoulders dropped, and something like resignation crossed his face, and for one hopeful second, Adrian thought he'd gotten through. You don't understand what you're standing in the middle of, Reyes said. This isn't a job you walk away from once you've taken the check. Holloway doesn't leave loose ends. You think I'm doing this because I want to. He gestured at the room, at the straining racks, at the wrongness of it all. I've got a family too, man. I took this job because the money was too good to say no to, and by the time I understood what it really was, I was already in too deep to get out. So no. I'm not turning the cooling back on. I turn it back on, I don't finish the job, and then it's me they bury instead of the servers. So you'd rather burn 3 years of records and let hundreds of people lose their jobs than tell the truth about a man who scares you. I'd rather my kids have a father. Reyes's jaw tightened. You of all people ought to understand that. You're a working man. You know what it's like to have somebody's whole life sitting on whether you keep your mouth shut. And the terrible thing was, Adrian did understand it. He understood it completely. He'd spent 4 years keeping his mouth shut and his head down and taking the check because there was a 9-year-old boy who needed a father who came home. He knew exactly the room this man was standing in because it was the same room, just with a darker door. You're right, Adrian said. I do understand it. I understand it better than you know. Which is how I know it's a lie you tell yourself so you can sleep. He took another step. He was 20 feet away now. Because here's the thing about men, like Holloway Reyes, the ones who don't leave loose ends. You are the loose end. The second this job's done, the second those servers are slag, and this company's his. What do you think happens to the one contractor who knows exactly how it got done and kept the checklist to prove it? You think he writes you a bonus? You think you go home to your kids? He shook his head slowly. You already told me you kept the paper to protect yourself. That means some part of you already knows how this ends. You're not protecting your family by finishing this job. You're just picking which grave they cry over. He watched the words land. He watched them go deeper than the man wanted them to. The footage is already off the building. Adrian pressed softer now. 2 copies, one of them where Holloway can never reach. That happened an hour ago, which means it's already over, Reyes. Whether you finish the job or not, the truth's out. The only thing left to decide is which side of it you're standing on when it lands. You can be the man who almost destroyed everything, or you can be the man who turned the cooling back on at the last second and gave the FBI the checklist himself. One of those men gets to see his kids grow up. The other one goes down with Holloway. Adrian held out his hand. Give me the paper. Turn on the cooling. Be the second man. Reyes stared at the outstretched hand. And for one long, breathless moment, Adrian thought he'd done it. Thought he'd reached the frightened father under the contractor, thought the whole thing was going to end quiet and clean right here in the hot, dim aisle. Then a voice came from the doorway behind him. Don't you dare touch that panel, Reyes. Adrian turned. Grant Holloway was standing in the double doors, and he was not alone. Two security officers flanked him, big men, company men, the kind whose loyalty ran to whoever signed the checks. And Grant himself, in a suit that cost more than Adrian made in 3 months, was looking at the scene in front of him with an expression of perfect poisonous calm. "There he is," Grant said, and his voice carried down the hot aisle smooth as oil. "The janitor, Vanessa's little friend from last night." He clicked his tongue. "I have to say I'm impressed. I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come down here. I thought you'd take the money and run like the last 3 did." He nodded at the security men. "That's him. The one I told you about. He's been harassing Ms. Sterling. He assaulted her last night, there's footage, and now he's broken into a restricted data center, and he's tampering with critical systems. God knows what he's trying to do. Sabotage, probably. Corporate espionage. Take him." "Grant." Adrian didn't move. "The cooling's off in this room. Your man Reyes turned it off 40 minutes ago, and it's climbing toward the red. In about 20 more minutes, these servers start failing, and when they fail, they take the financial records with them. All of them. 3 years of them. Now you and I both know that's exactly what you want, so let's not pretend. But these 2 gentlemen behind you," he nodded at the security officers, "they don't know that. They think they're stopping a saboteur, when really they're standing guard while their boss burns down the evidence of his own fraud. Isn't that right?" The 2 security men glanced at each other. "He's lying," Grant said smoothly. "Of course he's lying. That's what saboteurs do. The cooling system is functioning perfectly. Reyes is a certified systems contractor performing scheduled maintenance, and this man, this facilities worker, broke in and is now spinning some deranged conspiracy to cover for the fact that he's been caught red-handed. Take him. Now. That's an order." "Then prove it," Adrian said. "Prove me wrong. It's easy. Reyes turned the cooling back on, right now in front of your 2 security men. If it's all just scheduled maintenance like Grant says, turning it back on costs you nothing. So go ahead. Turn it on." He looked at the contractor. "Turn it on, Reyes." Every head in the room turned to Reyes. And Reyes stood frozen, the checklist in his hand, his eyes going from Adrian to Grant to the 2 security officers and back. And Adrian watched the whole war play out on the man's face. The fear, the calculation, the frightened father, and the trapped contractor, and the small dying ember of a man who'd wanted at some point in his life to be able to look his kids in the eye. "Reyes," Grant said, and there was steel under the oil now. "Do not touch that panel. You touch that panel. We have a very different conversation. You understand me. Very different. Think carefully about yours." "I've got 2 daughters," Reyes said to no one, to everyone. 10 and 13. "Then be a man they'd be proud of," Adrian said. "Just this once. Just today." Reyes turned and hit the panel. The change was immediate and enormous. Somewhere deep in the building's guts, massive compressors kicked on with a shudder that ran through the whole floor, and a rush of cold air came screaming down from the ceiling vents, and the straining pitch of the servers began very slowly to ease. Reyes stepped back from the controls with his hands up, and he was crying. Adrian realized silently the way a man cries when he's just done the first brave thing in years and doesn't know yet if it saved him or killed him. "There," Reyes said, his voice cracking. "It's on. It's on. I turned it on. And—" he held out the folded sheet of paper, held it out toward the 2 security officers. "And here's the checklist." He printed it. Holloway. On his own letterhead. Every step. It's all there. I kept it. I kept it in case exactly this. Take it. Please. I'll tell the police everything. Everything. Just it's over. I'm done." "You idiot," Grant breathed. And then everything happened at once. Grant lunged, not at Adrian, not at Reyes, but at the environmental panel at the controls, trying to shut the cooling back down. And Adrian understood in a flash of horror that the man wasn't giving up, that Grant Holloway would rather destroy the servers with his own hands in front of witnesses than let those records survive to be audited, because slag and chaos he could survive, but a clean audit trail of his fraud he could not. Adrian got there first. I didn't hit him. He just put his body between Grant and the panel, a wall of gray uniform, and 4 years of hard labor. And when Grant grabbed for the controls anyway, Adrian caught his wrist and held it the way he'd once held equipment steady over a long drop immovable. "No," Adrian said. "You don't get to touch it. Get your hands off me. Get your hands." Grant twisted, and he was strong, Jim strong, but he'd never done a real day's labor in his life. And Adrian's grip had been built hauling machinery and scrubbing floors and carrying a woman who weighed almost nothing up 62 floors of exhaustion. "You're finished, you hear me? You put one hand on me, and you're finished. I'll bury you. I'll bury your kid." It was the wrong thing to say. Adrian's face went very still and very cold, and the two security officers who had been standing frozen through all of it, unsure, waiting. The two security officers heard it too. "I'll bury your kid." They heard their boss, the man they'd come down here to obey, threaten a working man's child in a hot server room while a confessed saboteur held out a checklist proving fraud. And Adrian watched the last of their loyalty die right there on their faces. "Sir," the bigger of the two said slowly, "I think we all need to just everybody take a breath. Nobody's burying anybody's kid." He stepped forward and gently but firmly took the folded checklist out of Reyes's shaking hand. He looked at it. He read the letterhead, and his jaw set. "Mr. Holloway, I think you should let go of the panel. You work for me." "No, sir." The security officer's voice was quiet and final. "I work for Sterling Ridge, and I think we're going to go ahead and secure this room, and I think we're going to call the police, and I think everybody's going to keep their hands where I can see 'em until they get here, starting with you." For a second, Grant Holloway looked like a man watching the floor open under his feet. And then, because men like Grant always have one more card, always have a plan for the moment. The plan fails. His face smoothed over and he stopped fighting Adrian's grip, and he smiled. "Fine," he said. "Fine. Call the police. Call whoever you want. You've got a checklist that could have come from anywhere, and a confessed saboteur who will say anything to save himself, and a janitor with a grudge. That's not evidence. That's a story. And I have a boardroom full of directors, 60 floors up, who watched me present clear footage of that same janitor carrying our CEO into a bedroom in the middle of the night. You know what that boardroom is deciding right now while you all play cops and robbers down here?" His smile widened. "They're deciding whether Vanessa Sterling is fit to run this company, and I've already made sure the answer is no. So go ahead. Arrest me. By the time I'm out on bail, I'll own this building and every one of you will be looking for work." And Adrian realized with a lurch that the man might be right, because it didn't matter what they'd found down here if the board upstairs voted before the truth reached them. The servers were saved. Reyes had confessed. The checklist was in a good man's hands. But 60 floors up in a room Adrian couldn't reach. 13 directors were making a decision based on a lie, and the clock was still running. "Marcus," Adrian said into the radio low and fast. "The vault footage, the off-site copy. Did it go through? Did Vanessa get the link?" Marcus's voice came back, and it was strange, tight, and moving like a man walking fast. "It went through 20 minutes ago, brother. She's got it. She's had it the whole time." "Then why hasn't she used it? Why's Grant still standing here talking like he's already won?" "Because you told her to wait," Marcus said. "You told her to wait for the one moment where the whole thing lands at once." And Adrian... There was something in the older man's voice now, something that sounded almost like awe. "I don't think she's been sitting up there losing. I think she's been letting Grant talk. I think she's been letting him say every last thing on the record in front of 13 witnesses. I'm outside the boardroom right now. I can see her through the glass. She's just sitting there, real calm, letting him dig. 60 floors, up in a boardroom, bright with morning light. Grant Holloway's chair sat empty because Grant Holloway had excused himself 20 minutes ago to handle a facilities matter, and Vanessa Sterling had let him go, had watched him go because she'd known exactly where he was going and exactly why. She'd spent those 20 minutes doing the hardest thing she had ever done in her life, which was nothing. She'd sat at the head of the table while Grant's allies pressed the case, while they showed the photograph again, while they talked in grave voices about judgment and confidence and the appearance of impropriety, while they laid out the restructuring plan and the layoffs dressed up as fiscal responsibility. She'd sat and taken it, absorbed every blow, Let every one of them say the cruel thing they'd been wanting to say for 3 years about the girl who'd inherited her father's chair. And she'd said almost nothing, because Adrian's voice was in her head. We only get one moment where the whole thing lands at once. You wait for it. And she'd understood sitting there that the longer she let them run, the longer they hung themselves. And she'd watched the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for the signal that would tell her whether the man she'd sent into the fire had won or lost. Her phone had buzzed once 20 minutes ago. A link from Marcus. She'd opened it under the table, watched 10 seconds of grainy footage, a lean man in a vault room with a checklist, a logo in the corner, and she'd felt something in her chest unlock. The proof existed. It was safe. It was hers. She'd almost stood up right then. She'd almost thrown it on the screen and blown the whole thing open. But Adrian had said, wait. And Adrian, she was learning, was right about people in a way that she had never learned to be, because she'd been raised to see people as assets and liabilities, and he saw them as frightened human beings, doing frightened human things. So she'd waited. She'd waited while Grant slipped out to go finish his real work in the basement, because she'd wanted him in the room when it landed. But more than that, she'd wanted every director to hear the case against her, all the way to the end, to commit to it, to nail their colors to Grant's mast, so that when the truth came, it wouldn't just clear her. It would expose all of them. Now Grant was gone, and the case against her had run itself out. And 13 directors were looking at her, finally waiting for her to defend herself or resign. Randall Pierce, the eldest of them, her father's oldest friend on the board, folded his hands and looked at her with something that might have been sorrow. Vanessa, we've heard a great deal this morning. Some of it very hard. I've known you since you were a child, and I don't want to believe the worst. But you've sat there for an hour and said almost nothing to defend yourself, and that troubles me. If there's something you want to tell us, now's the time. Because when Grant comes back, I think this board is going to be asked to vote, and I don't know that I can stop it. Vanessa Sterling stood up. Thank you, Randall, she said. I've been quiet this morning because my father taught me that when your opponent is making a mistake, you don't interrupt him. And Grant Holloway has spent the last hour making the biggest mistake of his life in front of 13 witnesses. She picked up the small remote that controlled the room's display screen. You've all seen his photograph, a picture of a facilities supervisor named Adrian Walker carrying me through a door in the middle of the night. Grant told you it was evidence of my compromised judgment. He told you it was proof I'm unfit. He wanted you to see a scandal. She looked around the table, meeting every eye. I'm going to show you what it actually was. And then I'm going to show you what Grant Holloway has been doing 40 floors beneath this room while he kept you all busy staring at that photograph. She pressed the button. And on the screen, 60 floors above a data center where the cooling was roaring back to life, and a broken contractor was weeping, and 2 security officers were reading a fraud confession off a piece of embossed letterhead. The grainy footage began to play a lean man in a vault room, a folded checklist in his hand, and in the corner of the page, sharp and clear and utterly damning, the logo of Holloway Capital Partners. The boardroom went dead silent. And 40 floors down, Grant Holloway's phone began to ring and ring and ring as one by one, 13 directors reached for their own. Grant Holloway's phone was still ringing when he ran. I didn't run like a man with a plan. He ran like a man whose plan had just died, shouldering past the 2 security officers before they'd fully understood what the ringing meant, out through the double doors and into the warm corridor. And by the time the bigger officer shouted and moved after him, Grant already had 30 feet and a head full of panic driving his legs. Let him go, Adrian said. Sir, where's he gonna go, man in a $2,000 suit 60 floors underground with 13 directors calling his phone and a confession sitting in your hand? Adrian didn't even watch him leave. He was already turning back to the panel, already reading the numbers, and the numbers were the only thing in the world that mattered to him right now. He's not our problem anymore. The room is. Reyes, the cooling's on, but talk to me. How long was it off before I came in total? Best guess. Reyes wiped his face with the back of a shaking hand. 45 minutes, maybe 50. I turned it off right after I badged in. 50 minutes. Adrian's stomach dropped. That's a long time. That's a real long time. He put his palm flat against the nearest rack, and the metal was hot. Genuinely hot enough that a man couldn't hold his hand there for more than a few seconds. The cooling was pouring in now, screaming down from the vents. But the machines had been climbing toward the red for the better part of an hour. And the thing about heat that Adrian knew, and most people didn't, was that turning the cooling back on didn't fix it instantly. It just stopped it getting worse. The servers were still sitting at the edge, thousands of them, every one of them running hotter than it was ever built to run, and the metal held that heat and gave it up slow. "It's coming down," Reyes said, watching the panel. "Look, the intake temp's dropping. We caught it. We caught it in time." "No." Adrian's eyes went to a different number, a smaller one buried in the corner of the display. "No, look at that. The supply's cooling, but the return's still climbing. You know what that means? Somewhere in these rows the air's not moving right. The cold's coming in, but it's not reaching everything. There's a hot spot. There's a section of this room that's still baking, and the general cooling isn't touching it, and if it climbs another few degrees..." He stopped. He'd gone very still. "Reyes, the fail-safes. The automatic shutdown that's supposed to kill the servers to protect them if they overheat. You spent a week finding its edge. Where is it? What did you do to it?" Reyes went white. "Reyes." "I disabled it," Reyes whispered. That was the whole point. Holloway didn't just want the room hot. He wanted the fail-safes off so that when it overheated, nothing would shut it down safe. He wanted it to fail hard. Catastrophic. He wanted... His voice broke. He wanted a fire. That was the point. Not just lost data. A fire. Something total. Something nobody could ever reconstruct anything from. The word sat in the hot air between them like a struck match. "You disabled the fail-safes," Adrian said slowly. "In a room that's been overheating for 50 minutes with a hotspot climbing right now, and there's nothing set to shut it down before it catches. I can turn them back on." Reyes was already at the panel, hands flying. "I can re-enable them, they'll..." He stopped. His hands froze. No, I can't. Re-enabling the fail-safes triggers a full diagnostic reboot of the environmental system. 2 minutes, maybe 3. And while it reboots, the cooling stops. All of it. If I turn the safety back on right now, I shut off the only thing keeping that hotspot from catching for 3 whole minutes and... He looked at Adrian with pure, helpless terror. "And that hotspot doesn't have 3 minutes. Adrian was already moving. I went down the center aisle at a dead run, and he wasn't reading a panel anymore. He was doing the thing he'd been the best in the state at 15 years ago. He was reading a room. He was feeling for the air on his skin, tracking where it moved and where it didn't. Following the heat, the way a hunter follows a trail, and 40 feet down the aisle, he found it. A whole bank of racks where the air hung dead and thick, and the metal shimmered with heat haze, and the little amber lights had started one by one to flicker over to red. "Here!" he shouted back. "It's here! The airflow's blocked. There's something choking the return. The hot air's got nowhere to go. It's just sitting here cooking." He was already down on his knees at the base of the racks, hands searching, and he found it a service panel that had been left off a bundle of cabling pulled loose and shoved into the return airflow path deliberately, a small, ugly bit of sabotage that a maintenance man would never have done by accident. Reyes's rehearsal. The finishing touch. Block the airflow to one bank, disable. The fail-safes turn off the cooling and let physics do the rest. He blocked it on purpose. "Reyes, you son of a, you built a chimney. You built a spot where the heat's got nowhere to run, so it climbs till something catches. I didn't think it would. I was just following the save it." Adrian's hands were already in the cabling, hauling it clear, clawing the packed bundle out of the airflow path, and it was hot. It burned his fingers, but he'd had worse, and he kept pulling. "Reyes, I need airflow to this bank, and I need it now. Is there a manual damper? An emergency vent? Anything that dumps cold air straight to one section without waiting for the whole system?" There's the manual override on the overhead unit straight above you, but you have to open it by hand. Adrian looked up. 10 feet above him, mounted to the ceiling, was the cooling unit that fed this section and set into its housing, was a red manual handle, the kind you pulled in an emergency to dump maximum cold air to a single zone. He'd designed systems with that exact handle 100 times. He'd stood in front of rooms full of engineers and told them, "This is the handle that saves the room when everything smarter than you has already failed." It was 10 feet up, and there was nothing to climb. "Reyes, get over here. I need to get up there." Reyes came running, and the two of them, the man who'd built the trap and the man who'd come to spring it, looked at each other for half a second in the red-lit heat, and then Reyes dropped and braced his back against the rack and laced his hands. "Go," Reyes said. "I'll hold you. Go." Adrian put his boot in the man's hands and went up, and Reyes drove him higher with a grunt, and Adrian's burned fingers closed around the red handle, and he hauled it down with everything he had. For a sickening second, nothing. And then the overhead unit roared, and a column of frigid air came blasting straight down onto the choked bank of racks, so cold and so hard, it knocked the heat haze flat. And Adrian dropped down off Reyes's hands, and both of them staggered back and stood there gasping in the sudden cold as the little red lights on the racks flickered, red, red, amber, amber, and then one by one blessedly back to green. "It's holding," Reyes breathed. "It's coming down. Look at it. It's coming down." Adrian didn't answer for a moment. He was bent over with his hands on his knees, chest heaving, his burned fingers throbbing, and something was happening in his chest that had nothing to do with the exertion. Because he'd just done the thing. He'd walked into a dying room and read it and saved it with his hands and his head, and 15 years of knowledge he'd buried in a drawer behind his ribs and told himself he didn't miss. And it turned out he'd been lying to himself the whole time. It turned out the man he used to be hadn't died in that hospital room after all. He'd just been waiting, folded up and put away, waiting for the day somebody needed him again. "You okay?" Reyes asked. "Yeah." Adrian straightened. "Yeah, I'm okay." He looked at the racks, all green now, thousands of them, 3 years of truth humming along safe and cold. "We did it. It's saved. All of it." And that was when he smelled the smoke. Not much. Just a thread of it, sharp and electric, the smell of insulation that had gotten too hot before the cold hit it. His eyes went to the far corner of the choked bank, to a single rack near the bottom, where a thin gray wisp was curling up from between two servers. One component pushed past its limit in the last minute before the cold arrived, now smoldering. "Fire extinguisher," Adrian said, very calm, very fast. "Where's the nearest?" "By the door, 60 feet. Go get it, go." Adrian was already moving toward the smoke, pulling off his uniform shirt as he went, because a smoldering component could be smothered if you got to it in the first 10 seconds, and it turned into a wall of flame if you didn't. And the fail-safes that were supposed to catch exactly this had been disabled by the man now sprinting for the extinguisher. "Go, Reyes." He reached the rack. The smoke was thicker now, and there was a small orange glow deep in the guts of the machine, and he wrapped his hand in his shirt and reached in toward it. 60 floors up. Vanessa Sterling's phone, lit with a text from Marcus, and she read it standing at the head of a boardroom full of directors who were at that very moment watching the man they'd nearly handed the company to get identified in a fraud confession on the screen behind her. The text said, "Servers saved, but there's smoke down here." Adrian went in. "Fire suppression's off. Coming to you now, everything." She read it twice. And the second time she read it, all the careful, cold, strategic control she'd been wearing like armor for the last hour, cracked straight down the middle. "Randall!" Her voice came out wrong. "I have to go. Right now." "Vanessa, we're in the middle of the board, still has to. The board can vote without me." She was already moving, already halfway to the door, and 13 directors were staring at her. "There is a man 40 floors below us in a burning server room saving the records that just cleared my name and buried grants, and the fire suppression system was disabled as part of the sabotage, which means he's in there with a fire and no safety net. And I am not going to stand in this room and finish a meeting while that happens. Vote or don't vote. I don't care anymore." She stopped in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and she said the truest thing she'd said in that room all morning. "I spent my whole life being told the company came first. My father died believing it. I'm done believing it. Excuse me." And Vanessa Sterling, CEO of Sterling Ridge Technologies, ran. She ran in heels down a corridor and pounded the elevator button, And when it didn't come fast enough, she found the stairwell and went down it 2 steps at a time. 40 floors. Her lungs burning, her mind screaming a single word over and over. Adrian. 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 And somewhere around the 20th floor, she stopped thinking about the company at all. She stopped thinking about the board and the vote and the photograph and Grant. She thought only about a man in a gray uniform who'd caught her twice in the dark, who'd fed her crackers and told her, "Fine is not a feeling." It's a wall who'd sat up all night in a chair because she'd reached out in her sleep and grabbed his hand, and he was the kind of man who couldn't walk away from that. She thought about how she'd sent him down there, how she'd stood in her office and said, "I've never in my life needed anyone the way I need you to walk into that room right now," and he'd gone because that was who he was, and now he was in a fire. "Please," she thought, running. "Please. I only just found you. I have needed one honest person my entire life, and I finally found one, and if he dies down, they're saving my father's company, I will burn the whole building down myself." She hit the mechanical level, and the warm air told her she was close, and she followed the noise shouting the roar of the overhead units, and she came through the double doors into the cold and heat chaos of the server hall, just in time to see Reyes running back down the center aisle with a fire extinguisher, and past him 60 feet away. A man on his knees at the base of a smoking rack, his shirt off and wrapped around his hands, leaning into the smoke. Adrian. He didn't turn. He couldn't. He had the smoldering component smothered under his wrapped hands, and he couldn't let go of it. And the smoke was pouring up now into his face, and he was coughing deep and wet and wrong. But he wasn't moving because the second he moved, the air would hit it and it would catch, and he knew that, and so he stayed. "Move, Reyes, get the extinguisher on it." Reyes reached him and pulled the pin and hit the smoking rack with a white cloud of suppressant, and the orange glow died hissing. And only then did Adrian let go and fall back, and he fell wrong heavily, sitting down hard on the floor, and then listing sideways, coughing his eyes, streaming his lungs full of the acrid electric smoke he'd been breathing for the better part of a minute, so he could keep his hands on the fire. And then Vanessa was there. She didn't remember crossing the 60 feet. 1 second she was in the doorway, and the next she was on the floor beside him, with her hands on his face, and he was gray and coughing, and his eyes couldn't quite find her, and she was saying his name over and over, like it was the only word she knew. "Adrian. Adrian, look at me. Look at me. I'm here. I've got you." Her hands were shaking. "Breathe. Just breathe. It's out. It's over. You did it. You saved it. It's all saved. Now you just breathe. Records." His voice was a wrecked whisper. "The records? Safe. All of them. Every single one. You saved every one." She got an arm behind his shoulders, and she was crying now openly. The CEO who never let anyone see her wobble, crying on a server room floor in front of a confessed saboteur, and 2 security officers who'd come running down the aisle. "You stubborn, impossible man. You went into a fire. You went into an actual fire for a bunch of servers. What is wrong with you? You needed—" He coughed hard, and his hand came up and found hers, and gripped it weakly. This time the grip of a man running out of air, but a grip all the same. "You needed somebody not to leave," and she understood then that he'd said it to her on purpose, that he'd given her back her own moment from the night before. A person needed somebody not to leave. That's the whole thing, and that it was in its way the most that a man like Adrian Walker knew how to say about what had grown between 2 strangers in the space of a single storm-racked night. "Yeah," she whispered, holding his hand with both of hers, refusing this time to be the one who let go. "Yeah, I did. And you didn't leave. You never once left." She pressed his hand to her chest. "Now it's my turn. You hear me? I'm not leaving. Somebody get an ambulance. A real one right now. I don't care who finds out. I don't care what it looks like. Get an ambulance for this man right now." The paramedics reached him 4 minutes later, and they put oxygen on him, and they said the words smoke, inhalation, and going to be all right. And lucky he wasn't in there another minute, and through all of it, Vanessa Sterling did not let go of his hand. Not when they lifted him onto the gurney, not when they wheeled him down the corridor, not in the ambulance where she climbed in beside him without asking anyone's permission, because she was done asking permission for the things that mattered. Behind them in the boardroom, 60 floors up, 13 directors took a vote. It was not the vote Grant Holloway had planned. And Grant Holloway himself was found 2 hours later in the parking garage, sitting in his car, that he had not started staring at a phone full of calls he would never return. Waiting in the end for the police, because there was nowhere left for a man like that to run. Once the truth got out of the building, and the truth had gotten out of the building at 8:47 that morning, saved to an off-site drive by an aging security guard who'd texted the link to a woman who'd been smart enough and brave enough and finally trusting enough to wait for exactly the right moment to use it. But Vanessa wasn't thinking about any of that. She was sitting in the back of an ambulance holding the hand of a man who'd nearly died saving her father's company, watching his chest rise and fall under the oxygen mask. And she was thinking about a 9-year-old boy named Lucas, who was in school right now doing long division, with no idea that his father had just walked into a fire. Adrian. She leaned close. His eyes were open, tracking now, tired but there. Adrian, your son. Lucas. What school? I'll have someone know. No, I'll go myself. When you're stable, I'll go get him myself and bring him to you. I'm not sending a stranger. Just tell me the school. He looked at her for a long moment through the fog of the oxygen and the exhaustion, and something in his ruined face gentled. You'd go get him yourself, he rasped. The CEO. You'd drive across town and pick up a facilities worker's kid from school. I'd have gone into that fire for you if I'd gotten there 30 seconds sooner, Vanessa said. Picking up your son is the easy part. She squeezed his hand. Tell me the school, Adrian. He told her the school. And as the ambulance carried them through the morning streets, siren clearing the way, Vanessa Sterling made 2 phone calls. The first was to Marcus, telling him to secure the data center, preserve everything, and give the police full cooperation and every file they asked for. The second was to Rosa, the 70-year-old neighbor, whose number Marcus had, the woman who'd watched Lucas grow up 4 nights a week, and refused to take a dime to tell her that Adrian was going to be all right, that he was a hero, that the whole thing was over, and that a car would come for her if she wanted to be at the hospital, because family should be at the hospital, and as far as Vanessa could tell, Rosa was family. She did not make a third call. She did not call the board. She did not call her lawyers, or her assistant, or the head of communications, who was surely by now drowning in a crisis that had turned overnight from a scandal about the CEO into a scandal about the man who'd tried to destroy her. All of that could wait. All of that would keep. Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, for the first time, maybe since a phone had rung in the back of a car in Singapore and told her that her father had died alone, Vanessa Sterling had somewhere more important to be than the company. She had a boy to pick up from school, and a man to sit beside, and a hand that she was not under any circumstances going to let go. The school secretary would remember it for years. The morning a woman in a torn blazer with smoke still in her hair walked into the front office, signed her name in a hand that shook, and said she was there to pick up Lucas Walker on behalf of his father. And you are a friend of the family. Vanessa hesitated over it. Then she said the truer thing. The only friend of the family who could come right now. His father's in the hospital. He's going to be fine, but he can't come himself, and I promised I'd bring his son to him. She swallowed. Please. The boy doesn't know yet. Let me be the one to tell him. Gently. He's had enough people deliver bad news in a hurry. They brought Lucas down from his classroom, and Vanessa saw him coming down the hall and knew him instantly, because he had his father's face. The same steady eyes, the same way of looking at a stranger and deciding carefully whether they were safe. He was small for 9, and he was clutching a folder to his chest, and when he saw a woman he didn't recognize waiting for him, instead of the neighbor or his dad, his steps slowed and his face went wary in exactly the way Adrian's did. Are you Lucas? Where's my dad? Not a hello, not a question really. A demand quiet and braced from a boy who had already lost one parent and had spent 4 years living with the knowledge that people you love can just not come home. My dad picks me up, or Miss Rosa, not strangers. Where's my dad? And Vanessa Sterling, who had negotiated hostile takeovers and stared down boardrooms full of men who wanted her gone, got down on one knee on the linoleum floor of an elementary school, so she was eye to eye with a frightened 9-year-old and told him the truth, because his father had taught her in the space of a single night that the truth told gently was the only thing worth telling. "My name is Vanessa. Your dad works in my building. And this morning your dad did something very brave. He stopped some bad people from doing something terrible, and he saved a lot of things that mattered, and he saved a lot of people's jobs." She kept her voice steady. "But he breathed in some smoke doing it, and he's in the hospital right now. The doctors say he's going to be completely fine. I promise you that. I wouldn't say it if it weren't true. But he couldn't come get you himself, and he didn't want a stranger to come, so he told me your school, and he asked me to come get you and bring you straight to him. Right now. He's waiting for you." Lucas looked at her for a long, long moment with his father's careful eyes. "Smoke," he said. "Like a fire." "Like a fire, yes. He went into a fire." "He did." Lucas nodded slowly, and something moved across his small face that broke Vanessa's heart clean in half, not surprise. Recognition. The tired, ancient recognition of a child who already knew at 9 years old exactly the kind of man his father was. "He would," Lucas said quietly. "He always does that. He always helps." He looked up at her. "My mom told him to, before she died. She told me too. She said kindness matters most when nobody's watching." His chin trembled just once, and then he mastered it the way his father mastered things. "Was anybody watching when your dad went into that fire?" Vanessa had to stop and breathe before she could answer. "No, sweetheart, nobody was watching. He didn't know I was coming. He thought he was alone. He did it anyway." Lucas nodded again, and then he did something that undid the last of her. He reached out and took her hand. The same gesture, the exact same gesture his father had, reaching out to a stranger in a hard moment, and he said, "Okay, take me to him, and you can hold my hand if you want. You look like you need it more than me." She almost couldn't stand up. They drove to the hospital in the back of the same car that had carried her to 1,000 meetings she no longer cared about, and Lucas held her hand the whole way, and neither of them said much. And when they reached the room, Adrian was sitting up in bed with an oxygen line in his nose, and Rosa already installed in the chair beside him like a small stern queen. And the second Lucas saw his father, he dropped Vanessa's hand and ran. "Dad. Hey. Hey, buddy. I'm okay. Come here. I'm okay." Adrian caught his son against his chest, wincing, and held him. And over the boy's head, his eyes found Vanessa's in the doorway, and what passed between them then did not need a single word. "You went and got him yourself." "I told you I would." "You did." His voice was still ragged, but the fog was gone from his eyes. The board voted. Vanessa came into the room. Unanimous, not the vote Grant planned. They asked me to stay on as CEO. She almost smiled. "I told them I'd think about it." "You told the board you'd think about it. I have some conditions." She looked at him, at the boy in his arms, at the old woman in the chair, at this strange makeshift family in a hospital room, and she felt something settle in her chest that she had not felt in years, maybe ever. "A lot of conditions, actually. It's going to be a very long list. I might need help writing it. From someone who knows what it's like to be on the wrong end of a company that forgot its people were human beings." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. "You're offering me a job," he said, "from my hospital bed, with smoke still in my lungs." "I'm offering you a fight," Vanessa said. "There's a difference, and I think you're the only person I've ever met who'd actually take it." The weeks that followed moved fast, the way the aftermath of a broken thing always does, once the truth is finally out. Grant Holloway was arrested in the parking garage the same afternoon, and the checklist on Holloway capital letterhead was only the first thread. Once the auditors got into the records, Adrian had nearly died to save the whole tapestry unraveled. 3 years of siphoned funds, shell companies, a pattern of quiet theft that had been building since before Vanessa's father died, which meant, and this was the thing that hollowed her out in the small hours, that some of it had happened right under the old man's nose in the last year of his life, while he'd been too proud and too alone to let anyone close enough to see. Grant had counted on that pride. He'd counted on it in the father, and he'd tried to weaponize it in the daughter. He'd been very nearly right. Reyes told the police everything exactly as he'd promised in the server room, and his cooperation, and his own recovered checklist became the spine of the case. Vanessa did a thing that surprised her lawyers and infuriated a few of the directors. She wrote a letter to the court on the contractor's behalf. Not excusing what he'd done, she was careful about that, but telling the truth that a frightened man who had gotten in over his head had at the final moment, with everything on the line and a way out available to him, chosen to turn the cooling back on and hand over the evidence that damned the man who'd hired him. He built the trap, she wrote, and then he helped us spring it. I do not believe the law should treat those two things as though they were the same. When Adrian read it, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her a while, and then he said, "Your father wouldn't have written that letter." And Vanessa said, "No, he wouldn't have." And that was the whole conversation, and both of them understood it was the most important thing either of them had said all week. The two security officers who'd come down with Grant, and then turned the ones who'd read the letterhead and set their jaws and said, "I work for Sterling Ridge, not for you." Vanessa promoted both of them. Marcus Bell, she did not promote because when she offered, Marcus laughed at her. "Ma'am, I'm 58 years old, and I've got 18 months till my pension, and I like watching the rain and losing money to my own fantasy team. What I don't want is a corner office and a headache." He'd shaken his head. "You want to thank me, you do it by fixing this place so the next Adrian doesn't have to almost die to get somebody upstairs to listen. That's the thank you. That's the only one I want." She fixed the place. It did not happen overnight, and it did not happen without a fight, and there were board members who fought her every step. The ones who'd nailed their colors to Grant's mass that morning and never quite forgiven her for being right. But Vanessa Sterling had spent one night learning what her whole life had failed to teach her, and she did not unlearn it. She ended the culture of endless overtime that had nearly killed her at her own desk, not with a memo, but by walking out of the building herself at 6 o'clock week after week until the people who worked for her understood she meant it, that exhaustion was no longer the coin the company ran on. She expanded family leave. She built emergency childcare into the ground floor of the tower, a bright, clean room with cribs and toys for the parents who worked the odd shifts and had nowhere to put their kids. She wrote a policy that required every executive to follow the same health and hours rules as the people who cleaned their offices, and when one of them objected that it was beneath his position, she accepted his resignation on the spot and did not replace him with anyone like him. And she appointed Adrian Walker Director of Building Safety and Employee Operations. She was very clear about why in the meeting where she announced it, because she'd learned how easily a true thing could be twisted into an ugly one. She stood in front of the assembled leadership of Sterling Ridge Technologies, and she said, "I know what some of you are thinking. You saw a photograph once. So let me be plain on the record, so there's no room left for the ugly version. Adrian Walker is being promoted because 15 years ago, he was one of the best building safety engineers in this state, and then his wife got sick, and the world asked him to choose between his career and his family, and he chose his family the way any decent person would, and it cost him the work he loved. And then 4 years later, he walked into a data center that was rigged to burn with no safety net and no obligation and no one watching. And he read that room and he saved it, and he nearly died doing it. Not for a promotion, not for money, but because it was the right thing, and he was the only one who could. That is why he has this job. If any of you have a problem with a man like that in a position of responsibility, my door is open and so is the exit." Nobody took the exit. Adrian's first act as director was to walk the entire building, top to bottom, 62 floors, with a notebook the way he'd once walked buildings for a living. He found 41 things wrong. Some of them were small. Some of them were the kind of small that killed people. He fixed them all, and then he built a system so that anyone in the building, from the newest janitor to the oldest director, could report a safety concern and know that it would reach someone with the power to act, because he had learned standing in a hot server room, being told by an executive that a life-threatening power fluctuation was just a faulty sensor, exactly what it cost when a working man's warning got waved away by someone above his pay grade. The medical debt in the kitchen drawer got paid off. Adrian tried to refuse it, tried to insist he'd earn it back. Honestly, tried to turn the whole thing into another chance to make himself small, and Vanessa let him say his piece, and then she said, "It's not a gift, Adrian. Your health plan under the new policy covers it retroactively. It covers it for everyone whose spouse died and left them buried. You didn't get special treatment. You got the treatment every human being in this building should have gotten all along, and the only reason they get it now is because you made me see it. So pay me back if your pride needs to. Pay me back by making sure the next widower in this company never has to keep a drawer like that." And Adrian, who had no answer to that, paid the debt and kept his pride and made sure of the drawers. Lucas finished the science project, the one with the styrofoam planets. He and his father built it out over 3 evenings, and it was in the honest assessment of everyone who saw it. Still mostly a bunch of styrofoam balls. But Lucas won an honorable mention at the school science exhibition anyway, for the essay he wrote to go with it, about how his dad had taught him that the most important things in the universe were the ones you couldn't see from far away, like gravity and like kindness. Vanessa came to the exhibition. She stood in a crowded school gymnasium in flat shoes and a sweater with no assistant and no phone and no armor. And when Lucas got called up to receive his ribbon, she cheered so loud that Adrian looked at her sideways, startled, and she caught herself embarrassed. And then she saw his face, and she saw that he wasn't startled at all. He was watching her the way a man watches something he'd stopped believing he'd ever see again. "What?" she said. "You laughed," Adrian said. "Just now. When he tripped going up the stairs and caught himself and did that little bow. You laughed, out loud, like it came from somewhere real." He shook his head slowly. "I've known you 6 weeks, and I don't think I've heard that sound before." Vanessa thought about it. "I don't think I've made it before," she said. "Not in a long time. Not since—" She stopped. "My father used to say powerful people can't afford to laugh in public. It shows people you're not paying attention." She watched Lucas beam under his ribbon. "I think my father was wrong about almost everything, Adrian. I've been finding that out for 6 weeks, and it turns out it goes very deep. I wasn't wrong about everything." Adrian's voice was gentle. "He raised you, and you turned out to be the kind of person who ran down 40 flights of stairs in heels because a facilities worker might be in a fire. He got some things right." She had to look away for a second. "Careful," she said. "You'll make me cry in a gymnasium." "Wouldn't be the worst thing you've done in public lately." She laughed again, and this time she didn't catch herself. Their friendship deepened slowly and deliberately, and both of them were careful with it in a way that was its own kind of tenderness. There was a thing between them. There had been from the first gray morning when she'd woken up holding his hand, and neither of them had let go. But they were grown people who had both been broken by loss, and they knew that a feeling built in the pressure of a single terrible night was not the same as a life, and that to mistake one for the other was how people got hurt. So they didn't rush. Vanessa came to Sunday dinners at Adrian's small apartment, where Rosa cooked too much food, and Lucas explained the plots of movies at exhausting length, and nobody talked about the company. Adrian, in turn, learned the shape of Vanessa's grief, which was so much like his own, and so much lonelier. Learned that she'd never once cried for her father, that she'd been in a car in Singapore closing a deal when he died, and she'd closed the deal anyway because she thought it was what he'd want, and that she'd been carrying that around like a stone in her chest for 2 years and had never told a living soul. "You should tell him," Adrian said one evening on the small balcony, while Rosa and Lucas did the dishes inside. "Your father. I know he's gone. Doesn't matter. You should tell him that you were in Singapore, that you're sorry, that you'd have come home if you'd known." He looked out at the city. "I talk to my wife all the time. Out here mostly after Lucas is asleep. People think grief is about missing somebody. It's not. It's about all the things you never got to say and how they just keep piling up with nowhere to go." He was quiet a moment. "You've got 2 years of things piled up, Vanessa. That stone in your chest, that's them. You gotta let some of them out, or you'll drown the way he did. The way you nearly did at that desk the night I found you." Vanessa was quiet for a long time. "Will you stay out here with me?" she said finally. "While I do it. I don't think I can. I've never said any of it out loud. I don't think I can do it alone." "You don't have to do it alone." Adrian pulled the second chair closer. "That's the whole thing, remember. Fine is not a feeling. It's a wall." He sat. "Go on. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And on a small balcony, 60 feet above a quiet street, Vanessa Sterling finally talked to her father, haltingly, and then not haltingly, and then in a flood, 2 years of unsaid things pouring out into the dark, while a man who understood grief better than anyone she'd ever met sat beside her and did the one thing he was best at in all the world, which was refusing to leave. She cried for the first time since the phone call in the car. She cried so hard she couldn't breathe, and Adrian didn't try to fix it or hush it or make it smaller. He just stayed the way he'd stayed that first night, and when it was over, she was lighter than she'd been in years, and she reached over in the dark and took his hand, and this time, neither of them pretended it was anything other than what it was. A year later, on a bright cold morning, Sterling Ridge Technologies cut the ribbon on the Walker Community Center. It stood on a lot. The company had bought 2 blocks from the tower, and it offered what Adrian had walked the building looking for and never found for himself in his hardest years. Free after-school programs, science workshops for kids who liked styrofoam planets, and evening childcare for the parents who worked the odd shifts and had nowhere to put their children while they kept the lights of the city on. It was named for Adrian's wife as much as for Adrian. He'd insisted on that quietly, and Vanessa had understood without needing it explained. The plaque by the door read, "For everyone who chose their family and was asked to pay too high a price for it. Never again in this company." Vanessa gave a speech at the opening. She'd given 1,000 speeches in her life, polished and precise and empty, and this was not one of them. She stood at a podium in front of employees and families and a knot of press, and she put her notes down without reading them, and she told the truth. "A little over a year ago," she said, "I collapsed at my desk. I'd worked 16 hours without eating because I believed all the way down to my bones that powerful people were not allowed to need anything, that the day you needed help was the day you'd already lost. My father taught me that, and he believed it so completely that he died alone in a hospital while his only daughter closed a deal on the other side of the world. I nearly followed him. Not into the grave. Not that night, but into the same terrible loneliness, the same certainty that the strong don't get to be tired, don't get to be scared, don't get to reach out." She paused. "And then a man who cleaned this building's floors caught me before I hit the ground, and he fed me crackers, and he sat up all night in a chair because I grabbed his hand in my sleep, and he was the kind of man who couldn't walk away from that. And in one night, without meaning to, he taught me the thing my whole life had failed to teach me, that accepting kindness is not weakness. It is the single bravest act of trust a human being can perform. It is the thing that separates a life from a fortress. And I had been living in a fortress for so long, I'd forgotten there was any other way to live." She looked out at the crowd, and she found Adrian standing near the back, with Lucas beside him, and she held his eyes. "Everything this company is now," she said, "everything good we've built, it started that night. It started with one exhausted person reaching out, and one kind person choosing not to walk away. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was. And if you take nothing else from this building we're opening today, take that character isn't what you do when the whole world is watching. It's what you do in a dark room at 2 in the morning when you think you're completely alone. That's when it counts. That's the only time it ever really counts." The ribbon was cut. The children ran inside. And after the crowds had thinned, and the press had gone, and the sun had swung low and gold across the city, Adrian and Vanessa found themselves standing alone in the executive suite on the 62nd floor in the very office where their lives had first crossed a year and a lifetime ago. The bedroom door was still there off to the side. Neither of them looked at it directly. Both of them were aware of it. "Can I ask you something?" Vanessa said. "And you have to tell me the truth because you're constitutionally incapable of anything else, which is the most annoying and the best thing about you." "Go on." "That first night, when you carried me in there and put me to bed and I grabbed your hand in my sleep," she turned to face him. "Why did you stay? Really, you could have pulled your hand back. I was asleep. I'd never have known. You had a son at home, and a shift that was over, and every reason in the world to go. Why did you sit up all night in a chair for a woman you'd known for 2 hours?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. And then he told her the thing he'd never told anyone about the hospital room 4 years gone, about a woman he'd loved more than his own life, reaching out from a bed she was never going to leave and holding his hand exactly the way Vanessa had. Too hard, too scared, saying with her fingers the thing she couldn't say out loud. "Don't go. Don't leave me alone in the dark." About the promise he'd made himself that night, standing in the antiseptic quiet, that he would never again walk away from a person who reached for him like that. Not for any reason. Not for anything. "So when you grabbed my hand," he finished, "I didn't really have a choice. I'd already made it 4 years earlier in a room that smelled like the end of the world. You reminded me of the promise, that's all. I stayed because I'd promised somebody I would a long time before I ever met you." Vanessa's eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "I have a confession too," she said. "And I've been waiting a year to make it because I wasn't sure I'd ever be brave enough." "What?" "That first night, when I grabbed your hand." She held his eyes. "I wasn't asleep, Adrian. Not the whole time. I came up out of it around 3, and I felt your hand in mine, and I felt you sitting there in that awful chair, and I knew if I moved, if I made a sound, you'd wake up and be embarrassed and let go and leave, and it would go back to being the way it always was. Me alone in a fortress." Her voice broke just slightly. "So I lay there, and I pretended to be asleep, and I held your hand, and for the first time since my father died, I felt safe. Safe enough to stop fighting. Just for a few hours. And I have never in my life wanted anything as badly as I wanted those few hours to not end." She wiped her eyes and laughed unsteady. "So no, I wasn't asleep. I knew you were there, and I held on anyway. And I've been holding on ever since, if you want to know the truth. I just got better at pretending I was awake about it." For a moment, Adrian didn't say anything at all. Then he reached out slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away, the way he did everything, and he took her hand. Not because she'd fainted. Not because she'd reached out in her sleep. Not in a dark room where neither of them had to be accountable for it in the morning. He took her hand in the bright gold light of a clear evening, fully awake, fully himself in front of the whole city, with nothing to hide behind and no crisis to explain it away. "Then stop pretending," he said. "You don't have to be asleep for this. You don't have to be scared or exhausted or falling down. You can just want it. Awake. On purpose. In the daylight." His fingers closed around hers. "That's allowed too, Vanessa. That's the part nobody ever told you. Wanting something good out loud while you're wide awake, that's not weakness either. That's just being alive." And Vanessa Sterling, who had spent her whole life believing that the day she needed someone was the day she'd already lost, who had learned in the space of one storm-racked night and one long healing year that the exact opposite was true, reached out and took his hand again, fully awake and entirely by choice. She did not let go. She was never going to let go again. What began as a private act of compassion in a dark office at midnight had become a second chance for a grieving father, a lonely woman, and a company that had forgotten its people were human beings. Their story proved a thing the whole world seems determined to forget, and has to keep relearning one exhausted person at a time, that the title on your door decides where you sit, but only your character decides who stays when you can no longer stand alone. Grant Holloway had the bigger office and the better suit and every advantage money can buy, and he ended up alone in a cold car waiting for the police. Adrian Walker mopped floors and carried debt and answered to everyone, and he ended up holding the hand of a woman who would have run through fire for him, with a son who understood him in a life he'd nearly thrown away and chose in the end to live. Because kindness is not the thing you can afford only after you've won. Kindness is the thing that decides whether winning ever meant anything at all. And the moment that changes a life is almost never the grand one, the planned one, the one with the cameras rolling. It is one tired person at the very end of their strength, reaching out a hand in the dark, and one good person with every reason to walk away, choosing to stay. That is the whole of it. That was always the whole of it. And it will be the whole of it long after every tower in every city has crumbled back into the ground it was raised from. Adrian Walker stayed. And because he stayed, everyone lived.